Most people think worry comes from having too many problems. But what if that's not true? What if the real reason your chest feels tight at night, the reason your mind won't slow down even when life seems fine, has nothing to do with what's happening to you and everything to do with one invisible habit you've been living with for years without noticing? There is a single shift, subtle, almost quiet, that the moment it happens, worry begins to loosen its grip. Your breath changes, time softens, and life starts to feel strangely lighter, not because anything outside has changed, but because you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold. Most people never discover this shift, and those who do often wish they had known it much earlier. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you may realize that peace was never missing from your life, you were just looking for it in the wrong place. If this kind of wisdom speaks to you, and you want more moments of calm, clarity, and deep insight woven into everyday life, subscribe to the channel Buddhism in Every Moment. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful videos that don't just inform the mind, but quiet the heart and awaken something deeper within you. Most people wake up tired before the day has even begun. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but a deeper fatigue, the kind that sits behind the eyes, tightens the chest, and follows you even on days when nothing bad is happening. You go through the motions. You show up. You do what needs to be done. And yet, beneath all of it, there is a constant sense of pressure, as if life itself is slowly leaning its weight against you. We often tell ourselves this heaviness comes from responsibility, from work, from bills, from family, from the state of the world, from the endless list of things that demand our attention. But if that were the true cause, then rest would solve it. A vacation would fix it. A quiet weekend would be enough. And yet, even in moments of pause, the weight remains. This is where something important needs to be said, something most people have never been told. Life itself is not heavy. The days are not heavy. The moments are not heavy. What feels heavy is the way the mind holds them. From the moment you wake up, the mind begins reaching forward. It pulls tomorrow into today. It drags unfinished conversations, imagined outcomes, unmade decisions, and invisible expectations into the present moment. You may be standing in the kitchen, coffee in hand, morning light filling the room, but your mind is already hours, days, sometimes years ahead. Planning, rehearsing, preparing, protecting, and the body pays the price. The body tightens as if danger is near. The breath becomes shallow. The nervous system stays alert, not because something is wrong right now, but because the mind refuses to stay where life actually is. This is how ordinary moments turn into quiet battles. This is how simple days begin to feel overwhelming. Worry, at its core, is not a response to life. It is a response to imagined life. Most of the stress people carry does not come from what is happening. It comes from what might happen. What should happen? What could go wrong? What must be managed before it arrives? And because the mind treats these imagined futures as real, the body reacts as if they are already here. This is why you can feel anxious in a peaceful room. Why you can feel pressure even when no one is demanding anything from you. Why rest sometimes feels impossible, even when you finally stop moving. The invisible weight you carry is not created by events. It is created by mental resistance, the subtle but constant habit of being ahead of yourself, bracing for life instead of living it. Many people never question this habit. It feels normal, responsible, even necessary. After all, isn't worrying just caring? Isn't staying tense just being prepared? Isn't holding everything together the price of adulthood? But there is a quiet cost to living this way. Over time, the mind forgets how to rest inside the present. the body forgets what safety feels like. And life, instead of being something you participate in, becomes something you endure. You may notice it in small ways. The inability to fully enjoy a good moment without thinking about how long it will last. The habit of scanning for what's missing even when things are okay. The feeling that peace is always conditional, always postponed, until something else is resolved. This is not a personal failure. It is a deeply human pattern. One reinforced by a culture that values productivity over presence, control over trust, and constant improvement over quiet contentment. From an early age, many people are taught directly or indirectly that their worth depends on staying ahead, staying busy, staying vigilant. So the mind learns to stay tense, and the heart learns to wait. But here is the truth that changes everything: you were never meant to carry life this way. The present moment does not require defense. It does not ask you to solve it before you can be in it. Right now, in this moment, nothing needs to be fixed all at once. Nothing needs to be carried beyond what is already here. The heaviness you feel is not proof that life is too much. It is a signal, a quiet one, that the mind has wandered far from where life is actually happening. And this realization is not meant to criticize you. It is meant to soften you. Because the moment you see that the weight you've been carrying is not life itself, something inside you begins to loosen. A small space opens. Not yet peace, but the possibility of it. Not yet relief, but the understanding that perhaps you have been holding more than necessary. This is where the story truly begins. Not with changing your circumstances. Not with fixing yourself. But with gently questioning the invisible habits that have been shaping your inner world for years. The weight you feel has a source. And once that source is seen clearly, it no longer has the same power over you. This is the first step toward less worry. And the first opening toward more life. There is a moment many people miss, not because it is hidden, but because it is quiet. It does not arrive with drama or sudden relief. It does not announce itself as a breakthrough. In fact, most people experience it briefly and dismiss it without realizing what just happened. It is the moment when the mind stops pushing forward, even for a second, and something inside softens. The breath drops lower in the body. The shoulders release without instruction. Time feels less sharp, less urgent. Nothing in life has changed, and yet, something fundamental has shifted. This is the shift that changes everything. Most people believe peace comes from improvement, from solving enough problems, from fixing the past or securing the future. They live as if calm is a reward waiting at the end of effort, discipline, or success. Once things settle down, then I'll relax. Once I figure this out, then I'll feel okay. Once life becomes manageable, then I'll finally breathe. But life does not move towards stillness in straight lines. There is always another decision, another uncertainty, another unfinished edge. And so peace keeps getting postponed, not because it is unavailable, but because it is always being placed somewhere else. The shift is realizing that peace is not something you reach by changing life. It appears the moment you stop resisting the life that is already here. This is not a philosophical idea. It is a lived experience. You can feel it in your body when it happens. The nervous system no longer feels hunted by the next moment. The mind stops arguing with what is. There is a quiet sense of standing on solid ground, even if nothing about your situation is resolved. Most people spend their lives trying to change the external conditions of their experience, believing that inner calm depends on outer control. They rearrange schedules, relationships, goals, identities. They adjust and readjust, hoping the next configuration will finally allow them to rest. But the underlying tension remains, because the relationship with the present moment itself has never changed. The shift is not about escaping responsibility or lowering standards. It is about ending the internal struggle that says, this moment should not be happening yet. It is the release of the belief that life must behave a certain way before you are allowed to feel at ease. When resistance ends, something unexpected happens. You don't become passive. You become clearer. Action becomes simpler because it is no longer driven by fear. Decisions feel lighter because they are no longer carrying the weight of your entire future. You are still engaged with life, but you are no longer fighting it from the inside. This is why the shift feels so different from positive thinking or self-improvement. It does not require effort. In fact, effort often hides it. The more you try to force calm, the more tense the system becomes. The more you demand certainty, the more fragile everything feels. Peace emerges not through control, but through allowance. Allowance does not mean liking everything. It means stopping the internal war with reality. It means recognizing that this moment, even if imperfect, unfinished, uncomfortable, does not need to be rejected in order for you to be okay. Many people fear this realization. They believe that if they stop resisting, they will stop caring. That acceptance will turn into stagnation, but the opposite is true. Resistance drains energy. Acceptance returns it. When you are no longer battling what is, you have more capacity to respond wisely to what comes next. Think of how exhausting it feels to hold your breath. Not because breathing is difficult, but because resisting breathing is unnatural. The moment you stop holding, the body exhales on its own. Relief happens without effort. The shift works the same way. Peace is the natural state that appears when the strain of resistance is released. This is why the shift often feels like remembering rather than learning, like coming home rather than arriving somewhere new. There is a sense of recognition, as if something ancient and familiar has been rediscovered beneath years of mental noise. You may notice that when this shift happens, even briefly, worry loses its urgency. Problems still exist, but they no longer shout. The mind becomes quieter, not because it is forced into silence, but because it no longer feels the need to defend you from the present moment. This is not a permanent state you hold on to. Trying to hold it would be another form of resistance. It is something you return to again and again, each time you notice the mind pushing ahead, tightening, bracing. Each time you see that nothing needs to be carried beyond what is actually here. The shift is subtle, but its impact is profound. It changes how you breathe, how you listen, how you move through ordinary moments. It turns life from something you are managing into something you are meeting. And once you see this shift clearly, you begin to realize something quietly radical. Less worry does not come from a better future. It comes from a different relationship with now. This understanding opens a door, not to a new life, but to a new way of being inside the life you already have. And from that place, everything that follows begins to make sense. Most worry begins long before anything actually happens. It begins in the quiet moments when the body is here, but the mind is somewhere else entirely. When your feet are touching the ground, yet your thoughts are already racing ahead. When your hands are doing something ordinary, but your inner world is rehearsing conversations that haven't occurred, outcomes that haven't arrived, mistakes that haven't been made. This habit is so common that it feels invisible. It doesn't announce itself as anxiety. It often disguises itself as responsibility, foresight, or intelligence. You tell yourself you're just thinking things through, staying prepared, being careful. But beneath that explanation is a subtle abandonment of the present moment, a quiet leaving. To live ahead of yourself is to live in a place that does not exist. The future feels real because the mind can imagine it vividly. It can picture loss, failure, rejection, success, relief. It can create entire emotional landscapes out of thin air. And because these images arise in the same mental space as memory and perception, the body cannot tell the difference. The nervous system reacts as if the future is already happening. This is why the heart races for no clear reason, why the breath tightens without warning, why tension builds even when nothing is demanding your attention. The body is responding honestly, but to something that isn't here. When you live ahead of yourself, your energy is constantly pulled forward. You borrow stress from a tomorrow that may never arrive. You carry multiple versions of the same problem, replayed again and again in different forms. The mind believes this is useful, but the body experiences it as threat. Over time, this creates a chronic state of anticipation, a feeling that something is about to happen. Something must be managed. Something is just around the corner. Even moments of stillness become uncomfortable because the mind doesn't know how to stay where it is. You may notice this habit in small, ordinary ways. Eating without tasting. Listening without hearing. Resting while mentally preparing for what comes next. The present moment becomes a hallway you rush through on your way to somewhere else. And yet, life never meets you there. Life only happens where you are. Not where you're going. Not where you think you should be. Not where your fears or hopes are pointing. It happens here, in this breath, in this sensation, in this exact unfolding moment. When the mind keeps leaving, worry fills the space it leaves behind. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a learned survival pattern. In a world that moves quickly and rewards anticipation, many people are trained to live several steps ahead of themselves. To stay vigilant, to plan constantly, to scan for what could go wrong before it does. But what begins as protection slowly becomes exhaustion. The nervous system was never meant to stay activated all day. It was designed to respond to immediate danger, not imagined futures. When it is forced into constant readiness, it loses its ability to rest. Peace begins to feel unfamiliar. Stillness feels unsafe. Silence becomes loud. This is the hidden cost of living ahead of yourself. The shift begins not with stopping thoughts, but with noticing where you are when they arise. The moment you realize the mind has traveled forward, something important has already happened. Awareness has returned. You are back. There is no need to judge the mind for wandering. Wandering is what minds do. The practice is gentle recognition, seeing the movement without following it, feeling the body where it is, not forcing presence, but allowing it. You may notice the weight of your body where it sits or stands, the natural rhythm of your breath, already happening without effort, the subtle sounds around you, previously ignored. None of these need to be analyzed. They simply remind you where life is taking place. In the present moment, most of the fears that dominate the mind are nowhere to be found. They exist only as stories about later. When you return here, even briefly, worry loses its foundation. The future is still unknown, but it no longer has the same grip. This does not mean the future doesn't matter. It means it can only be met from the present. You do not need to live there in advance to be prepared for it. In fact, the more fully you arrive here, the more grounded and clear you become. When you stop living ahead of yourself, life begins to feel less urgent. Not because responsibilities disappear, but because you stop carrying them before they are real. You deal with what is in front of you when it is in front of you. And only then. This simple shift, returning again and again to where you already are, slowly restores something essential. The nervous system begins to settle. The breath deepens naturally. The mind no longer feels chased by its own projections. You discover that the present moment is not an enemy to overcome. It is a refuge you have been leaving without realizing it. And the more often you stay, the more you begin to understand worry thrives on absence. Presence quietly dissolves it. Much of the worry people carry comes from a single, deeply ingrained belief that if they loosen their grip, everything will fall apart. Control often feels like responsibility, like maturity, like proof that you care. You plan carefully. You anticipate outcomes. You replay decisions before making them. You hold yourself accountable not only for what you do, but for how everything might turn out. And because this habit is praised, even rewarded, it rarely gets questioned. But beneath this effort to manage life lies a quiet tension, a constant bracing, a sense that something is always at risk. The need to control outcomes does not come from confidence. It comes from fear. Fear that if you don't stay vigilant, something will go wrong. Fear that if you relax, you'll miss something important. Fear that peace must be earned by holding everything together perfectly. Over time, this belief becomes exhausting. Every choice begins to feel heavy. Every delay feels dangerous. Every unexpected turn feels like failure. The mind keeps asking, what if this doesn't work? Or what if I make the wrong move? And because the future is unpredictable, control never delivers the safety it promises. What it delivers instead is pressure. The truth is, life has never been fully controllable. Outcomes are shaped by countless forces: timing, other people, chance, health, change. No amount of planning can account for them all. When you try to carry the weight of results on your shoulders, worry naturally grows because the task is impossible. This is where a misunderstanding quietly causes suffering. Many people believe letting go of control means giving up. That if they stop gripping outcomes tightly, they will become careless, passive, or irresponsible. But letting go of control is not the same as letting go of effort. Effort belongs to you. Results do not. You can still act with care. You can still show up fully. You can still plan, work, and make thoughtful decisions. Letting go of control means releasing the belief that your worth, safety, or peace depends on how things turn out. When this belief softens, something inside begins to relax. The heart no longer feels like it must constantly defend itself against uncertainty. The mind stops running endless scenarios, trying to guarantee a specific ending. You begin to trust that you can meet whatever comes, even if it isn't what you hope for. This trust does not appear overnight. It grows through experience. You start noticing that you have already survived many outcomes you once feared. Situations that felt unbearable at the time eventually passed. You adapted. You learned. You continued. Life carried you forward, even when control failed. Seeing this clearly changes your relationship with the future. You stop demanding guarantees before allowing yourself to breathe. You recognize that peace cannot depend on certainty, because certainty is never promised. Letting go of control does not make life chaotic. It makes it more honest. You stop pretending that you can arrange everything perfectly and instead work with what is actually here. When plans change, you respond rather than collapse. When expectations fall apart, you grieve without turning the experience into self-blame. There is a quiet dignity in this way of living. You act sincerely without clinging. You care deeply without tightening. You give your best without demanding that life reward you in a particular way. As control loosens, worry begins to lose one of its strongest foundations. The mind no longer needs to constantly scan for threats to the future. Energy once trapped in fear returns as clarity, steadiness, and presence. Life feels less like a fragile structure you must hold up, and more like a moving process you are participating in. In this shift, something surprising happens. You don't become indifferent. You become freer. Decisions feel cleaner. Action feels more aligned. And even when outcomes are uncertain, there is a quiet sense of ground beneath you. Peace does not arrive because everything works out. It arrives because you stop making your inner well-being dependent on how things unfold. When you do your part and release the rest, you discover that life does not need to be controlled in order to be lived fully. And in that discovery, worry slowly loosens its grip, not because the future becomes safe, but because you no longer need it to be. Most people don't realize how much power they give to their thoughts. A single sentence appears in the mind, and the body tightens. A brief image flashes, and the heart sinks. A quiet prediction forms, and suddenly the future feels dangerous. Because thoughts speak in your own voice, they feel intimate, personal, authoritative. They sound like insight, like intuition, like truth. And so they are believed without question. The mind says, "This will go wrong," and the body responds as if it already has. The mind says, "You're falling behind," and shame settles in as if it were a fact. The mind says, "You're not safe," and the nervous system prepares for impact. But here is what is rarely understood: a thought is not a revelation. It is an event. Thoughts arise automatically, shaped by memory, habit, fear, culture, and conditioning. You do not invite most of them. You do not choose their timing or their content. They appear, linger for a moment, and disappear, often replaced by another, just as uninvited. And yet, because they appear inside you, you assume they must be about you, about reality, about what must be done. This is where so much unnecessary suffering begins. When every thought is treated as truth, the mind becomes a place of constant tension. The body reacts again and again to imagined dangers. Anxiety spreads not because life is unsafe, but because the mind is believed without pause. Worry grows not because the future is doomed, but because fearful predictions are mistaken for certainty. The mind was never meant to lead your life. Its role is to comment, compare, remember, and anticipate. This can be useful. But when commentary becomes command, the inner world turns hostile. You begin living inside stories rather than inside experience. What Buddhism quietly points to is not the elimination of thought, but a change in relationship to it. Thoughts are more like weather than truth. They form, they move, they dissolve. Some are light and fleeting, others are heavy and dark. But none of them define the sky in which they appear. Awareness remains open and unchanged, even as the weather shifts. The problem is not that thoughts arise. The problem is that they are believed. A worried thought says, "This could end badly." Another adds, "You won't be able to handle it." Another insists, "You should be more prepared by now." If these are taken as facts, the body contracts. Fear spreads. The mind races to solve a problem that exists only as a sentence in the head. But when the same thoughts are seen as mental events, temporary movements of the mind, their grip weakens. They may still appear, but they no longer command obedience. This shift does not require arguing with thoughts or replacing them with positive ones. It requires something simpler and far more powerful: observation. The moment you notice a thought as a thought, you step out of it. You might still hear the voice of worry, but now there is space around it. You no longer stand inside the story. You are watching it pass. And in that watching, the body begins to relax. The breath lengthens. The nervous system senses that it is no longer under immediate threat. This is not suppression. It is clarity. You begin to see how many of your fears are predictions, not realities. How many of your judgments are habits, not insights. How many of your worries are attempts to feel safe by thinking ahead, rather than by being present. When thoughts are seen clearly, you no longer need to chase certainty inside them. Some thoughts pass quickly. Others repeat themselves. But none of them need to be resolved in order for you to feel grounded. They are allowed to come and go without being followed. This creates a profound inner shift. You stop measuring your well-being by the quality of your thoughts. You realize that peace does not require a quiet mind. It requires knowing that you are not the mind. This understanding also softens the way you treat yourself. Instead of judging yourself for anxious thinking, you recognize it as conditioning playing itself out. Fearful thoughts are not proof that something is wrong with you. They are proof that you are human. When you stop taking them personally, shame dissolves and kindness replaces struggle. Over time, worry loses its emotional charge. Thoughts may still warn, imagine, or doubt, but they no longer define your direction. You respond to life as it is, not to every story the mind produces about it. There is a deep relief in this. A sense of space returning. You discover that you are larger than any thought, deeper than any fear, and steadier than any mental storm. Awareness remains while thoughts change, and in that realization, freedom quietly appears. The sky was never the storm, and you were never the voice in your head. When this becomes clear, worry no longer needs to disappear. It simply stops being believed. And in that absence of belief, something gentle and stable takes its place, a quiet knowing that you are here, aware, and not as fragile as the mind once made you feel. Much of what people call worry is actually fear of change. Not sudden, dramatic change, but the quiet, unavoidable movement of life itself. The way relationships shift without warning. The way emotions rise and fall on their own schedule. The way plans unravel, bodies age, seasons turn, and certainty slips through our fingers, no matter how tightly we try to hold it. At some point, often without realizing it, the mind makes an unspoken demand: this should stay the same. This feeling, this person, this sense of stability, this version of me. And when life does what it has always done, when it moves, that demand turns into tension, fear, worry. Impermanence is not what hurts us. Resistance to impermanence is. Most people don't consciously resist change. They resist it emotionally. They tense around it. They brace against it. They live with a background anxiety that says, what if I lose this? Or what if this doesn't last? Even joyful moments are shadowed by the awareness that they are fragile. Even success carries the fear of decline. The mind tries to solve this by clinging. It holds tighter to people, identities, routines, and outcomes, believing that security lies in permanence. But clinging does not stop change. It only makes the experience of change more painful when it arrives. Life was never meant to be held still. Everything you can name is already in motion. Feelings shift even as you notice them. Circumstances change while you plan around them. The person you were a decade ago no longer exists in the same way, and the person you will be a decade from now is already forming beyond your control. This is not a failure of stability, it is the rhythm of being alive. When the mind resists this truth, worry becomes constant. You begin guarding what you love instead of living it. You fear loss before it happens. You grieve endings before they arrive. The heart stays tense, not because something is wrong, but because it is trying to protect itself from the nature of life. The shift comes when you stop treating impermanence as a threat and start seeing it as a fact. Acceptance does not mean indifference. It does not mean giving up on what matters. It means aligning with reality instead of arguing with it. When you deeply accept that nothing stays the same, something inside relaxes. You stop being shocked by change. You stop asking why this is happening. You begin asking how to meet it wisely. This change in orientation transforms experience. Joy becomes richer because you are present with it, not clinging to it. You stop trying to trap it in time. You let it move through you fully, knowing that its beauty comes precisely from its fleeting nature. Pain becomes more bearable because you know it is not permanent. You allow it to be felt without turning it into a life sentence. Acceptance of impermanence also softens the fear of loss. Loss no longer feels like personal punishment or cosmic injustice. It becomes part of the shared human story. When something ends, you allow grief to arise without collapsing under it. You feel the ache without layering it with panic about the future. There is a quiet strength in this way of living. Not a hardened strength, but a flexible one. Like a tree that bends with the wind rather than snapping against it. You trust that whatever arises will also pass. You trust that you can adapt, even when you don't yet know how. This trust does not come from optimism. It comes from experience. You have already lived through changes you once thought you couldn't survive. You have adapted to endings you never planned for. Life has already proven that you are more resilient than fear suggests. When impermanence is accepted, worry begins to loosen its grip. The mind no longer needs to constantly guard against change. You stop demanding guarantees from a reality that cannot give them. Instead, you develop a quiet confidence in your ability to meet what comes. This does not make life predictable. It makes it livable. You move with change rather than against it. You stop tightening around moments, identities, and outcomes. You allow life to unfold, not passively but honestly. And in this honesty, something surprising happens. Life begins to feel lighter, more intimate, more alive. Not because you control it, not because you escape its losses, but because you finally stop fighting the very movement that makes it real. In accepting impermanence, you discover a deeper stability, one that does not depend on things staying the same, but on your capacity to remain present as they change. And from that place, worry loses much of its power because it no longer has a future to fear or a past to defend against. There is only this moment, unfolding, and you here to meet it. Most of the pain people experience does not come from what happens to them. It comes from how quickly they react. A word is spoken, a message appears, a situation shifts, and before awareness has a chance to enter, the mind has already judged, assumed, defended, or attacked. The body tightens, emotions surge, a story forms, and suddenly, you are no longer responding to life, you are being carried by it. Reaction feels fast, automatic, necessary. It gives the illusion of control, as if acting immediately will protect you from harm. But reaction is rarely wise. It is conditioned, built from old wounds, learned patterns, and past fears that are triggered without permission. This is why the same situations can provoke the same emotional storms again and again, even when you know better. The body reacts before understanding arrives. The mind repeats familiar scripts. Worry grows because life begins to feel like something that keeps happening to you, rather than something you are participating in consciously. When you live in reaction, there is no space. Emotions demand expression. Fear demands escape. Anger demands release. And worry demands constant thinking. The nervous system stays activated, scanning for the next threat, the next offense, the next thing that might go wrong. Even small events feel overwhelming because each reaction drains energy. Awareness offers a different way. Awareness does not suppress emotion, and it does not act it out blindly. Awareness notices. It sees what is happening without immediately needing to fix it. It creates space between what arises and what follows. And in that space, freedom quietly appears. The shift from reaction to awareness begins with something very small, almost unnoticeable, yet deeply transformative. The pause. Not a long pause. Not a dramatic one. Just a single breath. That breath interrupts the automatic chain between stimulus and response. It gives awareness time to enter the body. You feel the emotion instead of becoming it. You notice the tightness in the chest, the heat in the face, the restlessness in the stomach. You are no longer lost in the story. You are present with the experience. This moment of presence changes everything. When awareness leads, actions become slower, steadier, and more aligned with truth. You speak less, but what you say carries more weight. You act less, but what you do is cleaner and more intentional. You are no longer reacting to imagined threats or emotional echoes from the past. You are responding to what is actually happening. This does not mean emotions disappear. Anger still arises. Fear still appears. Sadness still moves through the body. The difference is that these emotions are no longer driving the wheel. They are felt, acknowledged, and allowed without being given authority over your actions. Worry weakens in the presence of awareness because worry depends on speed. It thrives when the mind rushes ahead of understanding. When awareness slows the process, worry loses momentum. The mind no longer spirals as easily. Thoughts come, but they do not immediately turn into conclusions. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with difficulty. Instead of asking, "How do I make this feeling stop?" you begin asking, "Can I stay with this feeling without being controlled by it?" That question alone transforms suffering. You discover that emotions, even intense ones, rise and fall when allowed. They do not need to be fixed or escaped. Awareness holds them gently until they pass. And as this becomes familiar, a quiet confidence grows. You stop fearing your own reactions because you no longer believe they define you. This shift also deepens compassion. When you see how your own reactions are conditioned, you begin to recognize the same patterns in others. Harsh words are no longer taken as personal attacks. Withdrawal is no longer seen as rejection. You understand that much of human behavior is driven by unexamined fear and pain. This understanding softens the heart and reduces conflict. Life begins to feel less combative. You are no longer bracing against every interaction. You listen more deeply. You respond more honestly. Even when situations are difficult, there is a sense of steadiness beneath them. You trust that you can meet what arises without collapsing or exploding. Living from awareness rather than reaction does not remove challenges from life. It changes how they are experienced. Challenges become situations to be met, not threats to be feared. You stop being pushed and pulled by every emotional wave. You stand in the center of your experience awake, grounded, and present. In that steadiness, worry loses much of its power. It cannot survive where awareness is strong, because awareness sees clearly, responds wisely, and trusts the present moment. Life becomes fuller, not because it becomes easier, but because you are finally here for it. One of the quietest causes of worry is also one of the most socially accepted: the habit of postponing happiness. It rarely sounds dramatic. It sounds reasonable, responsible, even wise. You tell yourself that peace will come once things settle down, once the pressure eases, once you reach a certain point. You don't deny happiness, you delay it. You place it just far enough ahead that it always feels almost within reach. When this project is finished, when life becomes more stable, when I finally figure myself out. And so the present moment becomes something to endure rather than something to live. This habit forms early. Many people grow up believing that happiness is a reward, something earned through effort, sacrifice, and success. You work hard now so you can rest later. You tolerate stress now so you can enjoy life eventually. Without realizing it, you train the mind to treat the present as insufficient. The cost of this belief is subtle but profound. When happiness is always placed in the future, now is never allowed to be enough. Even good moments are overshadowed by the sense that something is missing. Even progress feels incomplete because the finish line keeps moving. The irony is painful. The future you are waiting for can only ever arrive as another present moment. When the mind postpones happiness, it quietly rejects what is here. It creates tension in the body, restlessness in the heart, a constant feeling of being unfinished. Worry grows because the mind is always racing ahead, trying to secure a future where peace will finally be permitted. But that future never arrives the way the mind imagines. This does not mean ambition is wrong. It does not mean goals should be abandoned. It means happiness was never meant to be postponed as a prize for getting life right. It was meant to be experienced as a way of relating to life as it unfolds. Happiness, in this deeper sense, is not excitement or pleasure. It is a quiet okayness, a willingness to be here without demanding that the moment justify itself. It is the absence of inner argument, not the presence of constant joy. When you stop postponing happiness, something shifts internally. The pressure to arrive dissolves. The present moment softens. You stop treating life like a test you must pass before you are allowed to relax. This does not mean everything suddenly feels good. It means you allow contentment to exist alongside imperfection. You let moments of ease arise without questioning them. You stop pushing peace away because circumstances are not ideal. There is a deep relief in realizing that happiness does not require completion. You can feel it while things are unresolved, while questions remain unanswered, while life is still in motion. You do not need to wait for certainty before allowing yourself to breathe. When happiness is allowed now, worry loses much of its urgency. The mind no longer needs to constantly scan the future to feel safe. You discover that peace can exist even when things are unfinished, even when outcomes are unknown. This understanding changes how you experience challenges. Difficult moments are no longer obstacles blocking happiness. They become part of the texture of living. You learn that happiness is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to stay present with life as it is. As this becomes clear, ordinary moments regain their depth. Eating, walking, resting, and even struggling feel more real. You stop rushing through days in search of a future moment where everything finally makes sense. You begin inhabiting your life instead of waiting for it to begin. The belief that something essential is missing begins to loosen. And with it, the quiet anxiety that has been driving so much effort. Life does not need to be perfect before it can be lived fully. You do not need to arrive somewhere else before you are allowed to feel at peace. When you stop postponing happiness, you reclaim the present moment from constant anticipation. And in that reclaiming, worry begins to fade, not because the future becomes certain, but because you no longer depend on it to feel alive. Happiness was never waiting for you at the end of the road. It has been quietly available in every step you were rushing past. When all the striving quiets, when the inner pushing finally slows, something unexpected remains. Not emptiness, not indifference, not a dramatic sense of arrival. What remains is presence. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It feels almost ordinary at first, which is why so many people overlook it. But within this ordinariness is a profound shift. Life no longer feels like something you must manage, optimize, or survive. It feels like something you are finally inside of. Less worry does not arrive as a victory. It arrives as a fading, a soft dissolving of the habits that once kept the mind tense and alert. The constant mental noise begins to lose its urgency. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer dominate the landscape. Emotions still move through you, but they are no longer treated as emergencies. You are here now, and being here changes everything. The breath deepens without effort. The body settles without instruction. Even in the middle of uncertainty, there is a quiet steadiness beneath the surface. Not because life has become predictable, but because you are no longer standing against it. This is what remains when you stop forcing life to make sense before allowing yourself to live it. Presence does not promise a life without pain. It does something far more honest. It removes the extra suffering created by resistance. Pain may still arise, But it is no longer wrapped in fear, judgment, or endless mental commentary. Difficulty becomes something you meet, rather than something you flee from. There is a new quality to attention. Conversations feel more real. Ordinary moments feel complete. Even silence carries a sense of aliveness. You are no longer racing toward a future where peace will finally be permitted. Peace is recognized as something already available beneath the movement of experience. This does not mean you stop caring. In fact, your care becomes clearer. You care without clinging. You act without tightening. You engage without losing yourself. Worry fades not because you have solved life, but because you are no longer demanding that life guarantee safety before you show up. You trust that whatever arises can be met, moment by moment. This trust is not blind optimism. It is grounded in experience. You have already met countless moments you once feared. You have already survived uncertainty. You have already adapted more times than you remember. Presence reveals this truth gently, without argument. In this way of living, the future loses its emotional charge. You still plan. You still act. But you are no longer haunted by what has not arrived. The past loosens its grip as well. It is no longer a verdict on who you are. It becomes part of a larger unfolding, rather than a weight you must carry. What remains is a quiet strength. Not the strength of control, but the strength of being able to stay. Stay with joy without grasping. Stay with pain without collapsing. Stay with uncertainty without panic. This is more life. Not a louder life. Not a busier life. A deeper one. You begin to realize that the peace you were searching for was never hiding in the future. It was never waiting for you to become better, calmer, or more certain. It was waiting for you to stop leaving the moment where life has always been happening. Nothing dramatic needs to occur for this to be true. No final breakthrough is required. Life continues as it always has. Challenges still arise. Emotions still fluctuate. The world remains imperfect. But your relationship to all of it has changed. You are no longer living in anticipation or resistance. You are living in participation. Each moment is met as it comes, without being measured against what should have been or what might be next. Less worry follows naturally when resistance ends. More life appears naturally when presence is allowed. This is not the end of a journey. It is the end of unnecessary struggle. You were never behind. You were never broken. You were never meant to carry the weight of life alone. You were meant to be here. And here is where life has been quietly waiting for you all along. Throughout this journey, one truth has quietly revealed itself again and again. Worry was never the enemy. It was a signal. A signal pointing to where we were living ahead of ourselves, clinging too tightly, believing every thought, resisting change, reacting unconsciously, postponing happiness, and standing apart from our own lives instead of standing within them. The story you've just heard was not about becoming a different person or creating a perfect life. It was about returning. Returning to the present moment. Returning to the body. Returning to a way of living that does not require constant defense against uncertainty. Each shift we explored removed something unnecessary rather than adding something new. A layer of resistance softened. A habit of fear loosened. A belief quietly dissolved. What remained was not emptiness, but presence. A grounded, steady awareness that does not depend on circumstances being ideal. From this place, life does not feel lighter because problems disappear, but because you stop carrying imagined versions of them. You respond instead of react. You act with care instead of control. You allow joy without grasping and meet pain without collapsing. The deeper message is simple, yet radical. Peace is not a future achievement. It is a relationship with what is happening now. When that relationship changes, everything else begins to shift naturally. Worry fades not because you force it away, but because it no longer has a purpose. It was only trying to protect you from a life you believed you could not handle. Once you see that you can meet life moment by moment, worry gently steps aside. From this understanding, several powerful lessons emerge. First, your thoughts are not commands. They are events. When you stop believing every story the mind tells, you reclaim inner space and clarity. Second, control is not the same as care. You can give your best effort without demanding specific outcomes. Third, impermanence is not a threat. It is the rhythm that makes life alive. When you stop resisting change, fear loses its grip. Fourth, happiness does not belong in the future. It exists now, in your willingness to be present even when life is unfinished. And finally, awareness changes everything. A single pause can turn reaction into wisdom and tension into choice. Applying this to your life does not require dramatic transformation. It begins quietly. Notice when the mind runs ahead. Gently return. Notice when you tighten around uncertainty. Soften. Pause before reacting. Allow moments to be incomplete without rejecting them. Let peace exist alongside imperfection. These small shifts, practiced consistently, change how life feels from the inside. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which part of this message resonated most deeply? Where do you notice worry showing up in your own life? And what might it look like for you to make just one of these shifts today? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your experience as well. And if this reflection brought you clarity, calm, or a sense of being understood, please subscribe to Buddhism in every moment. Your support helps us continue creating content that speaks not just to the mind, but to the heart. Thank you for being here.